Hi AP, this is chapter 22. We're going to go over this relatively quickly because this is not necessarily going to be on your AP exam this year. For your updated information on the AP exam, please visit Google Classroom. You are going to be doing part writing using Roman numeral analysis and figured bass, and you will also have 2 sight singing examples. But because this is part of our curriculum, I want to make sure you get this information, and I know a lot of you have been asking about modulation for a long time, so here is a brief overview. I'm still going to post the chapter, so if you want to read in more detail, please feel free to do that on Google Classroom as well. So, in this chapter, we are going to be talking about modulation using pivot chords and keys that are closely related, considered to be closely related to each other. Now, I don't think I can play these examples on the computer using the application that I'm using to do this screencast, so please follow along on Google Classroom with these slides so that you can listen. Hopefully you remember our dum dum da 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 da. But just in case you want to listen and do a little bit more of a close analysis, please follow along on Google Classroom. So common pivot chord modulations basically uses what we've been looking at already, where we have 2 phrases, the first ending in a half cadence, the second ending in a perfect authentic cadence, but using a secondary dominant chord, in this case a 5/7 of 5, in order to get to the new key. So we're using that 5 of 5 to pivot from the key of D major to the key of A major. So we use the 5 of 5 in the key of D, which would be the 5 of A, which would be E major. So we have an E major chord getting introduced. That's why we have those G sharps added to our key signature. We have those G sharps added, and now we're in the key of A. We could continue on in the key of A using this simple pivot chord. That's it. You've already seen this happen in some of your music, and that's a very smooth type of modulation because you're using chromatic harmony that's related to the originally established harmony. So, continuing on using pivot chords can also be common chords that are shared from the original key, or shared rather between the original key and the key that you're trying to go into. So if we're looking here, we're analyzing in the key of D major, yes, and we see our D major chord in first inversion, and then our 6th chord, which is a B minor chord in first inversion. Now this B minor chord is also in the key of A. So we can use this B minor chord to pivot to the key of A, to pivot to the dominant key. So this key of A is related to the key of D. We know that because A is the dominant in the key of D. But what if we wanted to go here and continue analyzing in the key of A, or modulate in the key of A? Instead of using a secondary dominant, you can use a chord that's shared between 2 keys. So we're in the key of D, we're analyzing, we have a B minor chord. That's a 6 chord in the key of D, but it's a 2 chord in the key of A. Now I can pretend like I'm in the key of A on a 2 chord, go to a 5 in the key of A, which is E major, and continue on in the key of A. So this is the same phrase that we saw before, but analyzed in a different way, analyzed as if we were going into the key of A much sooner. Now you can analyze the way that we did before here, using the secondary dominant, so basically continuing to analyze in the key of D until you get much closer to the final cadence. Or you can analyze in the key of A. Either one is correct because within the context of the established key, whatever you're writing here, you are then relating all your Roman numerals back to it. So it's just another way to modulate, is to take a chord, a common chord, and use that as a pivot to the new key. So a chord that has full membership in both keys is called a pivot chord. You can often, they can often serve as a predominant, here in this case a 2 chord, in one or both keys. So usually you're looking to pivot in the predominant location if you're using a pivot chord in this way. A secondary dominant, you're using in a dominant situation. A pivot chord with a common chord is more in a predominant situation. So, is it a modulation or a tonicization? It's not always clear between the two, but we have talked about in class how a tonicization is usually temporary, whereas a modulation usually moves into the new key and stays there for a while. So you can see here a modulation should include at least one of the following: predominant, dominant tonic progression in the new key that really establishes the new key and kind of is telling the listener, we're here for a while now. A firm cadence, so an authentic cadence, either perfect or imperfect, in the new key preceded by predominant function harmony, and or music that continues in the new key. So really just establishing that new key. Are you spending some time there? Do you have a few cadences? Do you have a normal phrase structure in that new key instead of just maybe one or two chords? Or an extended progression in the new key. So not just dominant tonic, you have other chords within that new key that you're presenting in the context of that new key. So you're really, really hammering it in there. So a modulation is a full-on, you've changed keys, and now you're exploring music in that area. A tonicization is just maybe at the cadence itself. You're going a 5 of 5 to 5, and you're briefly tonicizing that dominant chord, and now that 5 sounds like 1 because you went 5 of 5, 5, and that sounds like 5, 1 in the new key. A modulation really, really, really explores that new tonal center. So context matters. Basically, you're looking at how brief is this key change in the grand scheme of the piece, and consider the length of the progression. These two really reflect what is up here in these bullets. Okay, so modulating from a major key to its dominant. Here we can see some shared chords between D major and A major. The D major chord is in common. In D major it's the 1 chord, in A major it's the 4 chord, and so on and so on. So we've boxed some of those shared chords, some of those common chords. We also note here the B minor chord is a 6 chord in the key of D, but a 2 chord in the key of A, and it has a predominant function in both keys. That means this B minor chord is going to be the most effective if you're using a common chord to pivot to a new key. That doesn't mean you can't use these other ones, but this is going to probably be your smoothest transition. The cool thing about using pivot chords in order to modulate is that they abide by the diatonic harmony because these chords are both shared, right? You have this B minor chord in D major, B minor, B, D natural, F sharp. That fits in both D major and A major without having to add any accidentals. So using common chords as a pivot, you may not be able to easily see that on the page because they abide by those diatonic structures. You still have the same notes. You're not changing any notes with accidentals. So be really careful when you're looking, but it's also this really, really smooth way of transferring from one key to the other. So here we go. That's basically what I just said. Pivot chords are diatonic in both keys. Therefore, they must have the same quality in both keys. So you're not changing, you're not adding accidentals, you're not changing those chords at all. Another recording I would love for you to listen to, but here we have a modulation from a minor key to its relative major. It's really easy to go from relative major minor or vice versa because they have the same key signature. So it kind of is the same idea as those common chords where you're dealing with the same group of notes, but in order to really establish the new tonal center, you want to focus on do a little bit more. So here we have this nice A minor chord, and we can tell that we're in A minor because we have some of this melodic minor movement, and we have this harmonic minor G sharp in here. So we can see this half cadence in A minor, and then we're traveling. Here we're starting to see something different happening. We're also beginning a new phrase, and here we can see C and A really highlighted, are two notes, or two keys really, with A minor and then going to C major, and then we move into a 2, 5, 1 in the key of C major, ending in an imperfect authentic cadence here. And really, we're using this A minor chord with the omitted fifth as a way to pivot. It's the 1 chord, it's a minor 1 chord in the key of A minor, but it's a minor 6 chord in the key of C. So we're using that predominant function in the key of C to go 6, 2, 5, 1, a very common chord progression. So please listen to this, but that's basically what's happening here. So you can use relative major and minor to modulate very smoothly. And here we can see some of the common chords. We have almost all of the chords in common between A minor and C major because they are relative major and minor. That means they share a key signature. The only chords you have to be careful of are the chords that we usually alter with the leading tone. So we get that major 5 chord in minor because we raise the leading tone. And that's what's happening with these 7 chords as well. The naturally occurring 7 chord or the 7 chord when we raise that leading tone. So pretty much all of the other chords are going to be common chords that you can use to pivot or just smoothly flow between these two sounds. A very, very common technique used by a lot of composers. Here's another example where we have a common chord. So we're going from A minor to C major, and we have both relative major and minor, and we're using that common chord of A minor to get to our new key. If you're really paying attention, this is the same thing that you saw 2 slides ago, where we have this ripple effect, and this is where we're pivoting and continuing to an imperfect authentic cadence in C major.